Her sister married her betrothed before her eyes. The most powerful Alpha King claimed the jilted bride. The kingdom of Eldrath shimmered in the first light of dawn, its towers reaching like jagged teeth toward the sky. Mist rolled through the streets of the capital, curling around the cobblestones and carrying the scent of sea salt from the distant cliffs. It was the day Lady Isolde had dreamed of since childhood. The day she would wed Lord Cale, the noble whose smile had been her secret comfort, whose promises had been whispered to her in the quiet of moonlit gardens. Her gown was a delicate weave of silver threads catching the light like frozen starlight. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the veil, a simple piece, but it felt like a shield against the world. She had rehearsed every smile, every curtsy, every word she would speak when she stood before Cale at the altar. She had imagined the joy, the celebration, the warmth of his hand in hers. Yet the air that morning was not filled with anticipation. It carried a strange tension, a ripple of unease that Isolde could not name. Something had shifted in the night, something she could not see but she could feel. Her sister, Seraphine, glided through the corridors like a shadow made of silk and ambition. Her dark eyes gleamed with a secret that no one else could guess, and her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her heart. She had always envied Isolde, not her beauty, but her happiness, the attention Cale had lavished on her without thought of ambition. As the church bells began their call, echoing across the marble halls, Isolde stepped into the grand procession. Nobles lined the streets, their eyes bright with curiosity and expectation. Cale stood at the altar, his back to the doors, waiting. Every heartbeat of Isolde's seemed to echo louder than the bells. The doors opened, light spilled across the stone floors, and the air felt charged. Electric. She walked slowly, every step rehearsed, every breath measured. But then a gasp rippled through the crowd, sharp and sudden. Cale did not turn, and there, at the entrance of the cathedral, was Seraphine. She wore the bridal gown meant for Isolde, her face calm, her eyes fixed on Cale with an intensity that silenced the church. She moved with purpose, and the crowd parted as if they feared to obstruct her path. Isolde froze, unable to understand, unable to believe what she saw. Her sister, her own blood, was standing in her place. And Cale, the man who had promised her everything, stepped forward, his voice steady, his eyes not on Isolde, but on the woman who had stolen her name, her moment, her life.
"Seraphine," he said, a strange mixture of regret and determination in his tone.
I will marry you. The words struck Isolde like a dagger. Her knees went weak. She could not speak. She could not move. The church spun around her, a blur of faces, whispers, and the metallic scent of fear. Seraphine smiled, a small, triumphant curve of her lips, and the congregation erupted in gasps, murmurs, and astonished cries. Isolde felt the world shatter around her. Every dream she had cherished crumbled in an instant. She wanted to scream, to run, to call Cale back, but her voice was gone, trapped in a web of shock and despair. She could only watch, helpless, as her sister exchanged vows meant for her, as Cale's hand slid into Seraphine's, sealing the betrayal in golden rings that gleamed like the sun mocking her sorrow. The ceremony ended in a haze of confusion. Guests whispered behind fans, and servants exchanged hurried glances. Isolde's heart thudded violently, a storm raging within her chest. She wanted revenge, but she also wanted to collapse into herself, to disappear from the world that had turned against her. It was then that he appeared. King Tharion, the Alpha King of Eldrath, whose presence alone could command armies and silence whispers, entered the cathedral. He moved with the grace of a predator, his black cloak sweeping behind him, his eyes pale, piercing, and impossibly deep, fixing on Isolde with a quiet intensity. The air seemed to bend around him, charged with power, fear, and something that felt like longing. No one dared speak. The church, still humming with shock and scandal, fell silent. Tharion's gaze did not move to Seraphine, did not acknowledge Cale. It rested entirely on Isolde. He approached her slowly, each step measured, deliberate.
his presence pressed against her chest, a weight of authority and something more primal that she could not name. "You are alone," he said, his voice deep, calm, and certain, like the tolling of distant bells.
"And yet you are not powerless."
Isolde's hands shook, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze.
I have lost everything," she whispered.
Tharian's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Perhaps, but sometimes loss is a doorway to power." He extended a hand. Not gentle, but commanding.
"Come with me! Not as a bride forced, not as a pawn in another's game. Come as someone who may yet claim her own destiny." Isolde hesitated. The temptation, the danger, the thrill, all stirred something she had never felt. She wanted to reject him, to remain in her grief, to disappear into shadow and sorrow.
And yet, something about his presence, the fire in his eyes, made her heart stir with a confusing mix of fear and curiosity. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. The moment she did, a current of heat and energy seemed to pass between them, a quiet promise of storms yet to come. Outside the cathedral, the streets of Eldrath seemed smaller, the sun dimmer, the winds sharper.
Tharian led her through corridors of power, past guards who lowered their heads in recognition, past whispers of servants who had heard tales of his might and feared him even in his quietest moments.
He brought her to his fortress, a Gothic palace perched on cliffs that fell sharply into the roaring sea below. Its black towers reached into the clouds, and the walls seemed alive with the pulse of ancient magic.
Within these halls, power was not questioned, loyalty was demanded, and every shadow hid secrets. "You will stay here," Tharian said, his voice echoing in the grand hall. "Not as a prisoner, not as a queen yet, but as someone who is mine to protect and to test." Isolde's eyes widened. "Mine?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Tharian's gaze softened, just a fraction, and yet it remained intense. "Yes. You have been claimed by circumstance and by the eyes of the world. But here, you are under my protection. And you will learn that power is not always cruel, nor mercy always gentle. Sometimes they are the same."
The days that followed were a blur. Isolde walked the halls of the fortress like a ghost, her heart torn between rage at her sister, grief over Kale, and a strange fascination with Tharian. Every glance he cast her way seemed loaded with questions, judgments, and unspoken promises. She could not tell if he sought to break her, to control her, or to awaken something within her that had long been dormant. And yet she found herself listening. She found herself noticing the small kindnesses hidden beneath his authority, the way he paused in the gardens to watch the sunrise, the way he handled the servants with unexpected fairness, the way his eyes softened when he believed no one was watching. One night, under the silver light of a full moon, Isolde wandered the terrace, her thoughts heavy with loss and confusion. The waves crashed against the cliffs far below, sending up sprays of salt and mist. Tharian appeared silently beside her.
"The world has not been kind to you," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But storms shape those who survive them." Isolde looked at him, her heart aching, her chest tight. I do not know who I am anymore," she confessed. "You are the same you always were," he replied. "Strong, unyielding, and now, marked by fate, it has brought you to me, whether you wished it or not."
Their eyes met, and in that instant, Isolde felt the weight of the world lift slightly, replaced by the thrum of something dangerous and powerful.
She wanted to retreat, to deny the connection that flared like fire between them.
And yet, she could not. Tharian stepped closer.
"You are mine now," he said quietly, his hand hovering near hers. "Not in ownership alone, but in the bond that choice can forge." "Fear me, yes. Challenge me, certainly. But know this, you will not be abandoned in your sorrow, not here." "Not while I breathe."
The wind tugged at her hair, the sea roared beneath the cliffs, and for the first time since the betrayal, Isolde felt the stirrings of hope and something deeper, unspoken, and entirely new. As the night deepened, the stars blinking like ancient witnesses in the sky, Isolde realized that her life had changed irrevocably. She had lost a love, a sister had betrayed her, and yet, by fate, by destiny, by the quiet pull of a king whose power was absolute, she had been given a path she did not yet understand. And in the shadows of the fortress, Therian's gaze lingered on her long after she had turned away, a silent promise echoing in the darkness. "You are mine now, and I do not release what I desire." A shiver ran through Isolde, not of fear, not entirely, but of something far more potent. The storm had arrived, and it had brought with it a king, a curse, and a destiny she could no longer ignore. The fortress of King Therian loomed against the gray sky like a jagged crown of black stone. From its highest towers the wind tore through the battlements, carrying the cries of gulls and the salt of the sea below. Within its walls, candles flickered in endless corridors, casting long shadows that seemed alive, moving as though they whispered secrets to one another. Lady Isolde had spent her first days wandering these halls in a daze. Every corner of the fortress was a reminder that she had been torn from the life she knew, from the world she understood. Yet, at the same time, there was a strange allure to the power that pulsed through these walls, the same power that radiated from Therian himself. He had made it clear, she was under his protection, but she was also a guest in a court where every glance, every word, carried weight. The servants were wary of her. Nobles treated her with a mix of curiosity and fear. And Therian, he watched, always watched, his gaze never leaving her for more than a moment, as though measuring, weighing, and testing. "You move as though you were walking on clouds," Therian remarked one evening as he escorted her through the halls. His voice, low and calm, carried a weight that made it impossible to argue. "Yet the ground beneath us is solid, and danger is never far. You must learn to walk with your eyes open, not with dreams in your head." I am trying," she said softly, though she was unsure whether she was trying to obey him or trying to obey herself. He studied her in silence for a long moment, his pale eyes unreadable. "Trying is not enough. Here, strength is measured not by what you feel, but by what you endure, and how you choose to respond."
She wished she could say she understood. Yet every day in this fortress was a test, though she did not yet know the rules.
The servants watched her, whispering behind fans and folded hands. Nobles eyed her with suspicion, noting how she lingered in Therian's presence. Even the walls seemed alive with judgment, their stone carved with the memories of those who had come before. One evening, she found herself in the library, a vast room of dark wood and towering shelves, filled with books bound in leather that smelled of smoke and dust. The light from the high windows fell in narrow strips across the floor, illuminating dust motes that danced like fireflies. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books as though seeking comfort in knowledge. Words had always been her refuge, the place where she could imagine another life, another fate. And yet, here, even words seemed to have weight, as though the stories themselves carried power. "You enjoy the quiet," Therian's voice said behind her, and she nearly jumped. He had a way of appearing without sound, a shadow folding into the air itself. "Yes," she admitted, her voice small. It feels safe." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room, and for a moment she was aware of the sharp lines of his face, the quiet strength in his shoulders, the way he seemed to carry the fortress itself with him. "Safety is a choice, not a gift," he said. "You can stay here and hide, or you can learn to face the world that has turned against you." She wanted to run from him, to retreat into the quiet corners of the fortress, and yet something in his words stirred a spark she had not felt since the betrayal at the cathedral. Perhaps this was not merely power. It was challenge. It was expectation. It was possibility. The days passed, each one a delicate balance of tension and discovery. Therian tested her in subtle ways. He would pose questions that seemed simple but were laced with hidden meaning. asking her how she would act in situations that required courage or cunning. Sometimes he allowed her glimpses of his private chambers where maps of the kingdom and strange artifacts lay scattered, the tools of a ruler who ruled with both mind and magic, and all the while the whispers of a curse hovered at the edges of conversation. Servants spoke in hushed tones about the Alpha King's lineage, of the ancient powers that slept beneath the fortress, and of a fate that had claimed many who dared to reach for him. Yet Tharion never explained, only watched, only tested. One night, during a storm that battered the fortress walls with wind and rain, Isolde found herself standing on the terrace, staring out at the churning sea below. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the towers in stark white, and the thunder rolled like the drumbeats of some distant army.
Tharion appeared silently beside her, as if summoned by the storm itself. "The world is dangerous," he said simply.
"And yet you do not flinch."
"I am learning," she replied, though her heart still quivered. He studied her, and for the first time his expression softened. Just a fraction, enough to make her feel that he saw not only her body but the fragile heart within.
"You have survived loss," he said. "You have survived betrayal. And yet, you remain unbroken. That is rare."
"That is valuable." Isolde felt a warmth stir in her chest, a strange mixture of pride and fear.
She did not trust the feeling, did not want to acknowledge the pull that Tharion's presence had over her, and yet she could not ignore it.
The following days brought more lessons. Tharion allowed her into the council chambers, where nobles debated matters of state with sharp tongues and sharper minds. She observed, listened, and sometimes spoke, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she realized that knowledge could be a weapon as sharp as any sword. Tharion watched her, noting her every gesture, every word.
He did not speak much in these sessions, but his eyes followed her, and when he did speak, it was always in a way that made others take notice. Isolde began to feel the subtle shift in the court: respect, cautious admiration, and fear.
Yet even as she learned to navigate the political labyrinth, the storm between her and Tharion remained. They argued in quiet moments, clashed over interpretations, and sometimes in the silence that followed found themselves lingering near each other, aware of the tension that neither dared to name. One evening in the gardens of the fortress, lit by lanterns in the silver glow of the moon, Isolde stumbled upon a small fountain, its water shimmering like liquid light. She knelt, dipping her hands into the cool water, letting it trickle over her fingers.
"You seek clarity," Tharion said from the shadows. "And yet the answers are not simple." "They never are."
She looked up, startled, and he stepped closer, the lantern light catching his features, sharp and commanding.
"Why are you so intent on testing me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because power is meaningless without understanding," he replied. "Because life is cruel, and it will take from you what it will, unless you learn to face it with eyes wide open. And because I have seen in you a spark that should not be wasted."
The words were not gentle, but they carried weight, and in them she sensed both danger and hope. She wanted to speak, to deny the truth she felt stirring within her, but the storm of her emotions left her mute.
The next morning, news arrived that shook the fortress.
Messengers brought word that Seraphine had not only taken Cale as her husband, but had begun to consolidate power in the lands surrounding Eldrath. Her ambition threatened the delicate balance of the kingdom.
Tharion's eyes darkened as he read the reports. "She is dangerous," he said, turning to Isolde. "And she will stop at nothing to claim what she desires. But we are not powerless. And neither are you." Isolde felt a shiver of determination, mingled with fear.
For the first time since the betrayal at the cathedral, she sensed a path forward, not one dictated by Seraphine, not one left to chance, but one she could shape with her own hands, guided by the strength she was only beginning to discover.
The Alpha King's fortress, with its shadows and its storms, its secrets and its whispers, had become her world, and in it, Tharion was both her guide and her challenge, a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure, whose presence ignited a fire she did not yet understand. And yet, even as she trained her mind and spirit, even as she learned the rules of this dangerous court, she could not escape the pull of his gaze, the weight of his claim. Every glance, every word, every silence was charged with tension, a promise of storms to come. One night, as the moon rose full and pale, Tharion came to her chambers. The wind rattled the shutters and the sea crashed against the cliffs below. He did not speak at first, only stood in the doorway, his figure outlined against the dark. "You have changed," he said finally. "And yet there is more within you that even you have not yet discovered." Isolde met his eyes, the flickering candlelight reflecting in her own. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance.
Tharion stepped closer, the air between them charged, dangerous and yet strangely tender. "I want nothing, and yet I want everything," he said softly. "You are mine now, Isolde. Not because I claimed you, but because fate has bound us. You will learn to trust me, or you will learn to regret it." Her heart raced, caught between fear, anger, and a longing she did not dare name. She wanted to retreat, to push him away, to run from the power that both terrified and fascinated her, and yet she could not. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fortress in stark white. Thunder rolled across the cliffs, shaking the windows. And in that moment, Isolde realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely a betrayed bride. She was a student of power, a witness to secrets older than the kingdom itself, and the chosen companion of a man whose presence could command armies and hearts alike. And as Tharion's hand brushed hers in a fleeting electric touch, Isolde understood that the path ahead would be treacherous, filled with danger, desire, and destiny. The fortress was no longer simply a place of stone and shadow. It was a crucible, and she would either emerge stronger or be consumed entirely. And above all, the Alpha King watched, waiting and testing, knowing that the true storm had only just begun. The forests of Eldrath lay thick and dark beneath a sky streaked with silver clouds. Ancient trees, their trunks gnarled like the hands of forgotten giants, rose high, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth, and strange lights flickered between the roots as if the very forest were alive, watching. Lady Isolde walked beside King Tharion, her cloak brushing against the undergrowth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. She had never ventured so far from the safety of the fortress, nor had she imagined a world so untamed, so dangerous, yet beautiful in its own shadowed way. "Stay close," Tharion said, his voice low, carrying an authority that seemed to make the forest itself pause. "The woods are alive with more than animals. These lands remember the past, and they will not forget anyone who passes through lightly." Isolde nodded, though her hands still shook slightly. Every step she took seemed to echo in the silence, every rustle of leaves a potential threat, yet she felt a strange thrill in the danger, a pull toward the unknown, as if the forest itself had been waiting for her arrival. They had journeyed here for a reason. Intelligence from the fortress had revealed that Seraphine's ambitions were aided by dark forces, relics of magic older than the kingdom itself. Rumors spoke of a cursed artifact she possessed, one capable of undermining Tharion's power and bending the lands around Eldrath to her will. To protect the kingdom and perhaps herself, Isolde had to confront this threat alongside the man who had claimed her as his own. The path twisted deeper into the forest, where sunlight barely pierced the canopy. Strange symbols were carved into tree trunks, glowing faintly with an eerie light. Tharion's eyes flicked to them with a mixture of recognition and caution. "Ancient wards!" he murmured. "They mark boundaries and warn of dangers. Stay vigilant, Isolde. Not all that is seen is safe, and not all that is unseen is benign." Isolde's pulse quickened. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and the harsh scrutiny of the court. Yet the forest pressed against her in a new way. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her. Every whisper of the wind a question she could not answer. And yet, beside her, Tharion moved with a calm confidence that both terrified and fascinated her.
Hours passed as they wound through the forest. The terrain grew treacherous, with roots snaring the unwary and mist curling over hidden cliffs. At times, Therian extended his hand, steadying her, guiding her through the dangers, though he never removed the weight of challenge from his gaze. "You hesitate?" he said quietly as they paused near a crystal-clear stream. "You have strength, Isolde, yet you doubt it. Doubt weakens the spirit more than any blade."
"I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. "I've never done anything like this. I've never faced what might be waiting for us."
Therian studied her for a long moment, and she saw no judgment, only a sharp awareness, a recognition of her fear and her courage all at once.
"Fear is natural. It is not weakness. It is what you do with it that matters."
Their journey continued, each step drawing them closer to the heart of the forest and the cursed land Seraphine sought to control. Strange creatures glimpsed in the shadows seemed to watch them, not threatening but aware, as though the forest were testing them, measuring their worth. As night fell, the air grew colder, and a fog rose from the forest floor, curling around their ankles. They made camp in a small clearing where the remnants of an old stone circle hinted at rituals long forgotten.
Therian lit a small fire, its glow reflecting in his pale eyes, and Isolde sat opposite him, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "You are not accustomed to these ways," he said, his gaze never leaving the fire.
"Yet you adapt more quickly than I expected."
"That is promising." Isolde looked down, unsure whether to feel pride or embarrassment.
"I follow your lead," she said softly. I don't know what else."
"Good," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Learning to rely on yourself is the first step."
Learning to trust another, that comes later. The night stretched long, the wind singing through the trees, the forest alive with unseen eyes.
And in the quiet moments, Isolde felt a strange tension between herself and Therian, a pull she did not understand. His presence was always commanding, but in these hours it seemed closer, warmer, yet just as dangerous.
"You are thinking too much,"
Therian said suddenly, his voice low and intimate.
"Thinking clouds judgment. Act when necessary, feel when allowed. The rest, let it pass."
Isolde's heart raced at the closeness of his words, the authority in his tone. She wanted to protest, to deny the stirrings of emotion she did not yet name. And yet she could not stop her eyes from following his movements, her mind from tracing the lines of his face in the flickering firelight. The following day they reached the ruins of an ancient temple overgrown with ivy and half swallowed by the earth. Strange runes glimmered faintly on the stones, resonating with the magic of the forest.
Therian stopped,
his expression tense.
"This is where the relic is hidden," he said. "Seraphine may already be here. Stay alert, trust your instincts."
Isolde nodded, clutching the small dagger he had given her, not for offense, but for protection. Her hands trembled slightly, yet the fear no longer consumed her as it had when she first arrived in the forest. Here, facing danger with Therian by her side, she felt a strange strength growing within her. They entered the temple cautiously, the air thick with the scent of earth and magic. Shadows clung to the walls, flickering as if alive, and Isolde felt a shiver run down her spine. Somewhere ahead, movement stirred. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, a figure emerged. Seraphine. Her eyes gleamed with triumph and malice, and in her hand she held a glowing relic, an orb of light and shadow that pulsed with power. "You've come far," Seraphine said, her voice cold.
"But this ends here, little sister. This kingdom will be mine." Isolde stepped forward instinctively, her dagger raised.
"You will not win," she said, her voice stronger than she expected.
"We will stop you." "You underestimate the consequences of your ambition," he said. "This ends now."
The relic flickered, casting strange shadows across the temple walls. A wave of power surged from it, knocking Isolde back slightly. She felt the forest's magic pressing against her, testing her resolve. And yet, she did not retreat. She felt Tharian's hand brush hers, steadying her, reminding her that she was not alone. Seraphine's laugh echoed, sharp and bitter. "You think the Alpha King can save you? Even he has limits. Even he can fall." Tharian's eyes flared, pale light reflecting the storm within him. "You mistake caution for weakness. I will not fail, and she will not be harmed by your greed." The relic pulsed again, and the room seemed to twist around them. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the air hummed with ancient magic. Isolde felt fear rise, but this time it was tempered with resolve. She would not allow herself to be a pawn any longer. She would fight, not just for Tharian, but for herself, for the kingdom, for the future she was only beginning to claim. In the chaos, Tharian stepped forward, shielding her as Seraphine lunged with the relic. Their powers clashed, the air vibrating with energy. And for a brief, fleeting moment, Isolde saw something in Tharian she had never seen before. Vulnerability, yes, but also unyielding determination, a willingness to risk everything to protect her. The battle was fierce, though unspoken. Words were few, but every glance, every movement carried meaning. Isolde realized that their connection was deeper than she had admitted, even to herself. He was not only her protector, but a mirror, reflecting her courage, her strength, and even her fears. As the night deepened, the clash reached its peak. Seraphine faltered for the first time, her confidence shaken by the combined strength of Tharian and Isolde. And in that instant, the relic slipped from her grasp, rolling across the temple floor, its glow dimming. Tharian moved swiftly, seizing the relic and containing its power. "It is over," he said, his voice steady, though the storm in his eyes remained. Isolde exhaled, relief washing over her. She had faced danger, confronted betrayal, and survived, not by fleeing, but by standing alongside the man who had claimed her. And in the quiet that followed, she felt something stir within her heart, something tender, something powerful and entirely new. As dawn broke over the forest, the light filtering through the ancient trees, Isolde looked at Tharian, and for the first time she felt she truly saw him. Not just the king, not just the Alpha, but the man who bore the weight of a kingdom, the burden of a curse, and the capacity for care that few ever glimpsed. Tharian met her gaze, and in the silence they both understood. Their bond had deepened, forged in danger, trust, and shared trials. But even as the forest breathed around them, a shadow lingered. Seraphine would not surrender so easily. Her ambition, her bitterness, and her cunning would rise again. And yet, Isolde no longer felt powerless. The Alpha King's hand brushed hers once more, a fleeting electric touch that spoke of promises unspoken, of futures yet to be written, and of a destiny neither could deny. The storm had passed, but the war for hearts, power, and redemption was only beginning. The morning sun broke over Eldrath, gilding the fortress towers with a soft golden light. Yet inside, the air was thick with tension. The previous night's storm had passed, but the echoes of battle still lingered in the halls. Lady Isolde walked beside King Tharian, her cloak sweeping the marble floors as they moved toward the throne room. Every step was heavy with anticipation. Today would decide not only the fate of the kingdom, but the path of their hearts. The throne room had never seemed so vast. High windows stretched toward the sky, casting long shafts of light across the polished stone. Nobles and guards lined the walls, their faces pale with worry. Murmuring in hushed tones, Seraphine had struck again, seeking allies, and her ambition threatened to tear Eldrath apart. Tharian's hand brushed against Isolde's, a subtle anchor amid the rising tension. He did not speak, but she felt the weight of his presence, the certainty that he would stand unyielding no matter what came. She drew strength from him, and at the same time she realized that her own courage had grown. She was no longer a frightened bride or a passive observer. She had become a force in her own right. At the center of the room, Seraphine awaited. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and her lips curved in a smile that was more threat than charm. Behind her, a circle of loyal nobles and mercenaries shifted uneasily, their loyalty bought with promises or fear. "You return," Seraphine said, her voice cold.
"I hoped you would not interfere, Isolde. Yet here you are, under his protection, no longer the timid girl you once were."
"I am not the girl I once was," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "And neither is Eldrath yours to claim." Tharian's gaze met hers for a brief moment, and she felt a surge of reassurance. Then he stepped forward, the floor trembling beneath the authority he commanded.
"Seraphine," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the room fall silent, "your ambition has led you to defy not only the crown but the natural order. This ends today!"
Seraphine laughed, sharp and bitter.
"You think you can stop me? You may be the Alpha King, but even you are not invincible."
Tharian's pale eyes narrowed. "No, but I am determined. And she," he gestured subtly toward Isolde, "is not to be harmed by your greed or recklessness." The tension in the room was like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Nobles and soldiers held their breaths, waiting for the first move. And then, with a sudden flare of motion, Seraphine advanced, the air around her humming with the dark power she had gathered. Isolde's heart pounded, yet she did not falter. She had learned courage in the cursed forest, strategy in the corridors of the fortress, and patience in the quiet hours beside Tharian. Now, all that knowledge and strength converged. She moved with purpose, positioning herself to assist, to protect, to act when necessary. Tharian intercepted Seraphine's first strike, his movements fluid, precise, a display of power tempered with control. The clash of wills sent a tremor through the throne room, and the shadows along the walls seemed to shift with the intensity of their conflict. "You cannot win," Tharian said, his voice steady but his eyes burned with the storm of his will. "Your choices have led you here, and yet even now, you underestimate the cost of your ambition." Seraphine faltered for a moment, her confidence shaken by the combined force of Tharian's authority and Isolde's unexpected intervention. She glanced at the relic she had brought, its glow flickering uncertainly under the Alpha King's control. Isolde saw her chance. With a steady hand, she stepped forward and carefully maneuvered the relic out of Seraphine's grasp, feeling its strange energy pulse beneath her fingertips. It hummed with magic, yes, but also with restraint, responding to the courage and resolve in her heart. "No!" Seraphine cried, lunging forward once more. But Tharian was ready. In a swift motion, he closed the distance between them, his presence a shield and a force all at once. "Enough!" he said. The word carried authority and finality, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Seraphine's power faltered under their combined will, and the relic dimmed, its glow fading until it lay inert in Isolde's hands. For the first time, the ambition that had driven her sister seemed small, fragile, mortal. She looked at the faces around her, realizing that loyalty and fear alone could not win what courage and heart could achieve. Tharian stepped closer to Isolde, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You have done well," he said softly. "You have faced danger, temptation, and betrayal, and yet you stood firm. That is strength, Isolde." "That is leadership," asked heaving, and for the first time she allowed herself to see him not just as a king but as a man who carried the weight of the kingdom and yet made space for her, who had demanded loyalty and respect, but also nurtured courage and trust. The nobles and guards in the throne room murmured their astonishment. Tharian's authority was undeniable, but so too was the quiet, unwavering bravery of the woman who had stood beside him. Eldrath had witnessed not only the fall of Seraphine's ambition, but the rise of a partnership forged in fire, danger, and shared purpose. Seraphine, realizing her defeat, recoiled. Her eyes flicked between Isolde and Tharian, the remnants of pride and fury giving way to the stark realization that she had been bested not by force alone, but by courage, wisdom, and unity. "You cannot stop fate," she whispered, before retreating, her followers in tow, their ambition now tempered by the undeniable strength of the Alpha King and the woman he had claimed. Silence filled the throne room.
broken only by the distant sound of the wind through the high windows.
Therian's eyes found Isolde's once more, and in the depth of his gaze she saw something she had never seen before. Not only pride, not only protection, but a tenderness tempered by fire. A willingness to risk all for her. "You have earned more than survival," he said, his voice low and intimate.
You have earned trust, respect, and perhaps, one day, my heart entirely.
Isolde felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper, something she had fought to deny through fear and uncertainty. She had survived betrayal, faced danger, and emerged not broken, but stronger. And in the process, she had discovered a bond with a man who was as powerful as he was vulnerable, as commanding as he was kind. The following days were a delicate return to order. Seraphine's retreat had sent ripples through the kingdom, but Tarian's strength combined with Isolde's courage ensured stability. They moved through the halls together, their presence a symbol of unity, a reminder that power tempered by heart could reshape even the most fractured of realms. In quiet moments, they walked through the fortress gardens, the scent of blooming flowers mixing with the salt of the sea breeze. They spoke little, for words seemed unnecessary.
The trust they had forged in danger and in shared trials was stronger than any conversation, and in the silence there was a recognition of mutual respect, admiration, and a growing affection neither could fully name aloud.
One evening, beneath a sky painted with the colors of sunset, Therian and Isolde stood atop the highest tower of the fortress. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of the forest and the sea.
Below, the kingdom stretched wide, its fields, forests, and towns bathed in the warm light of evening.
"You have changed me," Therian said quietly, his hand brushing against hers.
Not in ways I expected, but in ways I could not have foreseen. You have awakened something I thought lost long ago.
Isolde met his gaze, her heart full of unspoken emotion.
"And you have changed me," she replied softly. "You have shown me courage, strength, and the possibility of hope, even in the face of betrayal." They stood together in silence, the wind wrapping around them like a cloak of destiny. For the first time since the betrayal at the cathedral, Isolde felt a sense of peace, tempered by the awareness that challenges would always arise. Yet with Therian beside her, she knew they could face whatever storms came next.
The Alpha King's hand found hers fully, their fingers entwining. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried weight, promise, and the quiet declaration of hearts intertwined. In that moment, neither spoke of past betrayals nor of the shadows that lingered. All that mattered was the bond forged through trial, danger, and shared strength. And as the stars began to emerge, blinking softly against the deepening night, Isolde realized that she had not only survived her own trials, but had found a partnership, a love, and a purpose that was larger than herself. She was no longer a pawn in anyone's game, no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a force of courage and heart, standing beside a man whose power was unmatched and whose trust she had earned. Therian's voice broke the silence once more. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said, his tone gentle yet unwavering. Isolde squeezed his hand, a silent promise of loyalty, strength, and the love that had grown between them. "Together," she echoed. And above the fortress, beyond the forests and cliffs, the winds carried whispers of destiny, of kingdoms yet to rise, and of stories that would be told for generations. But within the walls of Eldrath, a new legend had already begun. The story of a woman who had faced betrayal, embraced courage, and claimed not only her own destiny but the heart of the most powerful king the kingdom had ever known. The storm had passed. The shadows had lifted, and in the golden light of dawn, Lady Isolde and King Therian stood together, unbroken, united, and ready to shape the world as one.